My son raised his glass and laughed, telling his wealthy investors that he had blocked my email years ago. He called it a funny solution for a nagging mother. Sitting alone by the kitchen doors, I felt the last 12 years of my life turn to ash. He thought those messages were gone, but he forgot that I was the one who taught him how to read. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 67 years old, and I have been a widow for 12 years. Walking into the ballroom of the Grand Hyatt in Seattle felt like stepping into a different galaxy. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ozone, a scent I associated with the new money my son was currently swimming in. I smoothed the fabric of my navy blue dress. It was 15 years old, but I had spent 3 nights tailoring the waist and steaming the silk until it looked respectable. This was the launch of Silver River Tech, my son Daniel's crowning achievement. I wanted to look like I belonged, even if I felt like an artifact from a museum that had been accidentally left in a modern art gallery. The hostess, a young woman who looked at me with professional pity, led me to my table. It was table 24. I did not need to be a mathematician to realize that 24 was the last number in the room. I was seated right next to the swinging double doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter burst through with a tray of salmon, a gust of garlic and industrial sanitizer hit me. To my right was the corridor leading to the guest restrooms. Meanwhile, up near the stage where the lights were purple and gold, I saw the back of my daughter-in-law's head. Olivia and her parents were seated front and center, clinking champagne glasses with the board of directors. They looked radiant. I looked like the coat check lady who had gotten lost on her break. I tried to make myself small. I sipped the lukewarm water in my glass and listened. The acoustics in the room were strange. Sound carried from the standing tables near the bar, straight to my exile in the corner. I heard voices I recognized. It was Daniel's inner circle, a group of young men in sharp suits who spoke in acronyms I barely understood. They were laughing about something, their voices loud with the confidence of people who have never had to worry about a heating bill. "It is painful, man," one guy said, shaking his head. "I spent 2 hours showing my dad how to attach a PDF last week. The older generation is hopeless with this stuff." "Tell me about it." Another voice agreed. "They treat an email inbox like a physical mailbox at the end of a driveway, just slow and confused." Then came the question that froze the blood in my veins. A woman with a tablet tucked under her arm asked, "Hey Daniel, how come your mum never likes the project updates we send out? We added her to the newsletter list like you asked, but there is 0 engagement. Is the address wrong?" Daniel's laugh was distinct. It used to be the sound that made my whole day brighter when he was a boy. Now, it sounded sharp, metallic. He held up his glass of whiskey and shrugged. His posture relaxed. "I blocked my mum's email," he said. His voice was casual, easy. "Seriously, I blocked it 3 years ago. Saves me from explaining things 1,000 times. You know how it is? She sends these long essays about nothing, forwarding chains, asking about buttons. It is just easier this way. I tell her I get them, and everyone is happy." The group erupted in laughter. They clapped him on the back, as if he had cracked a brilliant code for dealing with a nuisance. I sat there, gripping the stem of my glass until my knuckles turned white. It felt as though the temperature in the room had dropped 20 degrees. It was not a joke to me. It felt like someone had physically picked up my chair and dragged it out into the parking lot. I felt the sting of hot tears pressing against my eyelids. I could not let them see. I could not be the weeping old woman in the corner. I bent down, pretending to fumble with the strap of my heel under the tablecloth. My hands were shaking. In my head, a frantic debate raged. Should I leave? Should I stand up, walk out those double doors, and take a taxi back to my empty house? Or should I stay and smile like the good, invisible mother they expected me to be? A drum roll echoed from the speakers, saving me from having to decide immediately. I sat up, blinked away the moisture, and looked at the stage. Olivia took the microphone. She looked stunning in silver, every inch the supportive partner. "At Silver River, we believe in family," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "We believe in roots. Daniel built this from nothing. He rose from the middle class with nothing but grit and his own 2 hands." She gestured to him, and the room applauded. There was no mention of the woman who worked double shifts to buy his first computer. No mention of the father who taught him how to build things that lasted. I was a ghost in their success story. My mind raced back to the hundreds of emails I had sent over the last 3 years. I had typed them with such care. I remembered the one where I told him I finally perfected his favorite banana bread recipe. I remembered the email about the roof leaking during the November storms, asking for advice because I was scared to climb the ladder alone. I remembered the late nights when I missed his father, Mark, so terribly that I wrote to Daniel just to tell him that Mark's pillow still smelled like sawdust and rain. I had poured my grief, my pride, and my daily life into those messages. I thought he was just too busy to reply. I thought he was saving them for later. But they had gone nowhere. They had been blocked, deleted, erased like dust. A cannon blasted from the stage, showering the room in silver confetti. The guests cheered. Everyone stood up to toast the future. I remained seated. I looked at the wine glass in front of me. The reflection showed a woman with grey hair and a tired face. But behind the tiredness, something hard was forming. It was a cold, heavy resolve. I placed the glass down on the tablecloth with a deliberate thud. I was done sitting by the kitchen door. I was done wondering why my son was silent, if he wanted to block me out. He was about to find out exactly what happens when you cut the wires to the only person who truly knows you. I did not know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This was the last time Eleanor Hayes would be the joke of the party. I spent 40 years of my life teaching English literature at Ridgeline Learning Center, a small community college just north of Seattle. I taught students how to deconstruct a tragedy, how to find the turning point in a narrative, and how to appreciate the weight of a silence between 2 lines of dialogue. I lived my life in words. My husband, Mark, lived his life in wood. He was a carpenter, a man with rough hands and a gentle soul who could look at a pile of lumber and see a dining table before he even picked up a saw. We were happy in our small way, living in the cedar shake house he built with his own hands, saving pennies in a coffee tin. When Mark died of a stroke just 2 weeks after Daniel graduated from college, he left me with that house, a very modest savings account, and a silence so loud it sometimes made my ears ring. In those early, hollow years of widowhood, email became my lifeline. I was not a woman of the digital age. I preferred the scratch of a fountain pen on paper. But Daniel was moving fast into a world of code and servers. So I adapted. I sat at the clunky beige desktop computer Mark had bought used from a library sale, and I taught myself to type. My fingers were slow and stiff, hunting and pecking for the letters. But I poured my heart into those messages. I wrote to Daniel about the small things, trying to bridge the gap between my quiet suburban grief and his loud city ambition. I remember distinct emails I sent during that time. There was one from 5 years ago, where I told him I had finally found the blue ceramic vase Mark had repaired the year before he died. I described how I could still feel the ridge of the glue where Mark's thumb had smoothed it over, a tactile memory of his father that I thought Daniel would cherish. I sent another with a grainy photo of the worn velvet armchair in the living room, the one where Daniel used to curl up and read comic books for hours on end. I asked him if he wanted me to keep it, or if I should reupholster it. I sent emails congratulating him on his first project, on his first office, on his first feature in a local business magazine. I hit send on every single one of them with a flutter of hope in my chest, imagining him reading my words on his lunch break and smiling. But the replies never came. Or if they did, they were not replies to the letters I wrote. They were text messages, brief and clipped, arriving days later. "Sorry, Mum, crazy week," they would say. "Cannot talk now. Meeting ran late. Love you. Sleep well." They were automated responses from a son who was too busy building the future to look at the past. I told myself it was just the medium. I told myself email was too slow for him, too old-fashioned. Then Olivia came into the picture. She was a public relations expert, a woman who knew exactly how to stand and how to smile to maximize her appeal. She was polite to me, always asking about the weather or my garden, but her eyes were like polished glass. She suggested video calls. She said it was more efficient. We would get on a call for 3 minutes, and she would talk over me, steering the conversation to Daniel's schedule or their new car, never letting me finish a sentence about my day. I started to blame myself. I convinced myself that I was just clumsy with technology. I thought perhaps my emails were too long, or I was formatting them wrong, or they were getting lost in his spam folder because I did not know how to set up my signature correctly. I bought books on digital literacy. I took notes. I tried to be better, to be the modern mother who could keep up. I never forgot the day I decided to stop calling entirely. It was 2 years ago. I had accidentally pressed the FaceTime button on my iPad while trying to close a recipe app. Daniel answered, but he was not alone. He was standing in front of a whiteboard, midway through a pitch to 3 men in suits. His face went red with embarrassment and anger. He hissed at the screen that he was working and disconnected before I could even stammer an apology. I felt small. I felt like a nuisance. From that day on, I made a rule for myself. I would only use email. Email was silent. It was polite. It sat in an inbox, waiting patiently to be read. It did not interrupt. It did not humiliate. Now, sitting in my kitchen with the lights off, I stared at the blue glow of my laptop screen. The cursor blinked at the end of my latest message, a draft I had started before the party. Outside my window, I could see the warm, yellow light of the neighbor's living room. I could see shadows moving, a father lifting a child, a family existing together in the same physical space. I was alone with a machine. I realized then that for 3 years, I had been sending my love into a void, respecting a silence that my son had enforced not out of busyness, but out of a deliberate choice to mute me. The cursor blinked again, taunting me. It was waiting for a send command that would never matter. I drove home that night through a fine, misty rain that seemed to coat the windshield in a permanent blur. My feet were throbbing in the heels I had worn for too many hours, but the physical pain was a welcome distraction from the hollow ache in my chest. When I walked into my silent house, I did not go to bed. I sat at the kitchen table, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop. For the first time in years, I did not open a new draft to write to my son. Instead, I clicked on the Sent folder. I scrolled down, page after page. It was a digital graveyard, hundreds of messages, spanning 3 years, all sitting there with no flags, no replies, and no bounce-back notifications. They had gone somewhere, but they had certainly never arrived in my son's heart. The feeling that something was fundamentally wrong settled in my stomach like a stone. The next afternoon, I went next door to help Arthur, a widower who lived alone and struggled with his internet connection. While I was resetting his router, he complained about the amount of junk mail he received. He told me his grandson had set up a filter to block all the unwanted noise, so he never even had to see it. He called it a blessing. The word stuck in my throat. A blessing for the receiver, perhaps, but a curse for the one being blocked. The seed of suspicion that had been planted at the party began to sprout into a thorny vine. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, Daniel and Olivia stopped by. It was a tactical visit, brief and efficient. They needed some of Mark's old tax documents for a trust they were setting up. The house felt suddenly small with them in it. Daniel was pacing the kitchen, talking loudly on his phone, while Olivia stood by the window, checking her watch every 30 seconds. When Daniel's call dropped, he groaned and told us he had to take it outside for better reception. He walked out to the patio, leaving his iPad propped up on the kitchen island, the screen glowing bright against the dark granite. I intended to bring it to him. I truly did. I picked it up, meaning to slide the glass door open and hand it to him. But as I lifted it, the screen rotated, and the email application came into view. The sidebar was open. My eyes were drawn immediately to a folder labelled Blocked and Muted. It was highlighted in red. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, bird-like rhythm. I should have put it down. Instead, I touched the folder. The list expanded. There, at the very top, was my email address, Ellie Hayes. Next to it was a rule Daniel had written himself. It read, Mom, autofilter, do not notify. I felt the blood drain from my face. He had not just ignored me, he had built a wall. But as I stared at the screen, I saw something else that made me freeze. Below the block list, there was a nested system of folders that I had never imagined. One was labelled Family Archive. Another said, Mom, forwarded. And the last one, the one that made my breath hitch, was simply titled Mark Letters. I stood there, paralyzed. If he had blocked me, why was he forwarding my emails? Why was there an archive of letters from his dead father if he claimed he never wanted to deal with the past? This was not just avoidance. This was a system. He was filtering my life, sorting my grief and my memories into neat little digital boxes that he could access or ignore at his convenience. The sound of the sliding glass door track grinding open snapped me back to reality. I frantically tapped the screen off and set the iPad back on the island, exactly where it had been. My hands were shaking so badly that I knocked a dish towel off the counter. It fluttered to the floor just as Daniel stepped back into the kitchen. "Ready to go?" he asked, grabbing the tablet without looking at it. I bent down to pick up the towel, using the movement to hide the terror and the fury on my face. When I stood up, I forced the muscles of my mouth into a calm, flat line. "Yes," I said. "You have everything you need." That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The shadows from the oak tree outside danced across the plaster. The phrase, "I blocked my mum's email," replayed in my head, but it no longer sounded like a joke. It sounded like a confession. He had silenced me, yet he had kept everything. I realized then that I was not just a nuisance to him. I was content. I was data. And as the rain began to fall again outside, I made a promise to the empty room. I would not cry about this anymore. I would not forgive him. And I certainly would not let him keep filtering my life. I was going to find out what was in those folders. The next morning, I packed my laptop into my canvas tote bag and marched down to the community centre. I had walked past the flyer for the Digital Skills for Seniors class a dozen times in the last year, always averting my eyes with a mix of embarrassment and stubborn pride. I had told myself I did not need charity lessons on how to double-click a mouse. Today, however, I walked right in and signed my name on the roster. I was not there to learn how to play solitaire. I was there to learn how to fight. The instructor was not the 20-something college student I expected. He was a man named Victor Lawson, a 72-year-old retired lawyer who had spent his career in the legal departments of major technology firms in Silicon Valley. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and had the sharp, observant eyes of a man who had read thousands of pages of fine print. He volunteered his time to teach people like me about cybersecurity, online scams, and privacy rights. He did not speak to us like we were children. He spoke to us like we were clients. During the coffee break, I approached him. I held my styrofoam cup with both hands to stop them from trembling. I told him I had a friend who was having trouble with her email. I said this friend suspected her son had blocked her messages, but she was confused about some folders she had seen. Victor did not smile or offer a platitude about how busy young people are these days. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses and asked me to open the laptop. He said that if I wanted, he could help me understand exactly what was happening with the account of my friend. We sat in the back corner of the computer lab. Victor showed me things I never knew existed. He taught me how to check the delivery logs and how to set up a read receipt so I would know if an email was opened. We created a brand new email address, one that was clean and unconnected to the old filtered life I had been living. I chose the username Eleanor.h.writer. It felt like a small reclamation of my identity. Then Victor frowned. He was clicking through the settings of my old account, his fingers moving fluidly over the trackpad. He pointed to a rule in the forwarding section that I had never set up. He asked me if I knew an address starting with mark.hayes.archive. I shook my head. He explained that every email I had sent, and every email from my late husband's old account, was being automatically forwarded to a private server. He traced the domain. It belonged to Brightline Image Group. The air left my lungs. Brightline was Olivia's public relations firm. Victor opened a new tab and searched for the company. He navigated to their recent projects page. There, plastered across the screen, was a campaign titled Lighting Up Memories. It was a marketing strategy for a cloud storage service designed to appeal to families preserving their history. The copy on the website used phrases that made my stomach turn. It talked about the wisdom of a carpenter father and the resilience of a mother left behind. It quoted lines that I recognized instantly. They were lines from the letters Mark had written to Daniel. Letters I thought were private. Letters I thought were lost in the digital ether. I sat there, staring at the screen. Olivia had not just ignored me. She and Daniel had harvested our life. They had taken the intimate, painful details of Mark's death and my grief, and they had packaged it to sell cloud storage. Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. He told me that in his line of work, they called this personal narrative exploitation. He said it was at the very least a gross violation of privacy, and at worst, it was emotional fraud. I expected to cry. I expected to feel that familiar wave of humiliation wash over me, but as I looked at the slick, professional font of the website using my husband's soul as a tagline, the tears did not come. Instead, a cold, hard sensation spread from the base of my neck down my spine. It was clarity. It was rage. But it was a rational, focused rage. They thought I was just a confused old woman who could be muted and mined for content. They were wrong. Victor looked at the evidence spread across my table. He pointed out that Silver River Tech was currently in a fragile fundraising round. Their entire brand was built on the idea of ethical technology and human connection. They were selling Daniel as the tech genius with a heart of gold, the son who used his success to lift up his family. If the investors found out that this same man had blocked his mother for years and that his wife was fabricating family trauma for marketing clout, the narrative would collapse. The joke he told at the party was not just cruel, it was a liability. If they want to use your husband's name to make money, Victor said, his voice low and steady, they are going to have to deal with his wife. I spent the next 2 days living in the glow of my monitor and the rhythmic whir of my old inkjet printer. I turned my kitchen table into a war room. I printed every single email that had been languishing in the digital void. Holding the physical pages in my hands gave them a weight that the screen could not convey. I held the printout of the message I sent 3 years ago when I had that scare with my heart arrhythmia. I had written to Daniel simply to say I was driving myself to the urgent care and would let him know when I was back. He never replied because he never saw it. I held the email where I asked him if he wanted the notebook of poetry Mark had written during his final months. I had been afraid to throw it away, but too heartbroken to keep it. That message, too, had been met with silence. It was not just a lack of communication. It was a systematic erasure of my needs. With Victor guiding me through the technical steps, we managed to access a backup of Mark's old email account. I found a folder there that made my breath catch in my throat. It contained a series of drafts and sent messages from the month before Mark died. He had written to Daniel, man to man. I sat in the stillness of my kitchen and read my husband's words. He told Daniel that he was worried about leaving me. He wrote that I was strong, stronger than anyone gave me credit for, but that no one should have to be strong in an empty house. He explicitly asked Daniel to be present, not to fix things with money, but to offer his time. I realized with a jolt of nausea that Daniel had likely never read these words. Mark had tried to parent his son from beyond the grave using the one medium Daniel claimed to master, and Daniel had simply filtered his father out along with the spam. The betrayal deepened when I turned my attention to the Brightline Image Group website. I clicked on their award-winning portfolio section. There was a video titled The Architecture of Care. It was a 3-minute short film. I watched it, unblinking. The video featured an actor playing a middle-aged widow living in a rustic wooden house that looked suspiciously like mine. In the film, the house was falling apart, the garden was overgrown, and the woman looked helpless. Then, a handsome young businessman arrived in a luxury sedan. He orchestrated a renovation, hired a team of gardeners, and sat on the porch holding the mother's hand while she wept with gratitude. It was a grotesque distortion of my life. I was the one who had fixed the roof. I was the one who maintained the garden. Daniel had never come to hold my hand. But there, scrolling up in the credits, was the line that cemented my Resolve Story concept by Olivia Reed Hayes. She had stolen the aesthetic of my grief, rewritten the narrative to make her husband the hero and me the charity case, and used it to win an industry award. I took a screenshot. I felt like a character in a book who had suddenly realized the author was trying to kill her off. I looked at the stack of papers. This was my weapon. I did not need to scream or make a scene at a restaurant. I had the receipts. I had the dates, the timestamps, the contracts, and the stolen stories. A part of me was terrified. I was a mother, and the instinct to protect my child was woven into my DNA. I did not want to destroy his company or ruin his life, but I realized that protecting him from the truth was what had gotten us here. I had to choose between his comfort and my dignity. I opened my laptop and logged into the new, clean email address Victor had helped me create. I composed a new message. I did not attach the evidence yet. I just needed him to know that the silence was over. I typed Daniel's address in the recipient field. In the subject line, I wrote, "From the mother you muted, before I disappear for real." I activated the read receipt tracker Victor had installed, a small digital eye that would tell me the exact second he opened it. My finger hovered over the send button. I took a deep breath, exhaled the last of my hesitation, and clicked. The response to my email arrived in exactly 9 minutes. It was the fastest Daniel had communicated with me in a decade. He did not call, but the message was urgent, suggesting we meet for dinner immediately at a place Olivia preferred. It was a rooftop restaurant downtown called the Apex, a fortress of glass and steel where the appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I had never been there before. The elevator ride up to the 42nd floor made my ears pop, a physical reminder of the altitude difference between my life and theirs. When I arrived at the table, Olivia was already seated, radiating a practiced warmth that did not reach her eyes. She stood up to kiss my cheek, smelling of expensive vanilla and ambition. She told me right away that they had been so worried about me because they had noticed I was offline recently. It was a bold lie, considering they had engineered my digital silence, but I let it slide. Daniel sat opposite me, fidgeting with his cloth napkin. He looked everywhere except at my face. He studied the menu, the view of the Seattle skyline, and the bottom of his water glass. I watched Olivia take control. She signaled the waiter with a flick of her wrist and ordered a bottle of wine without asking if I wanted any. She spoke to the manager, who stopped by to greet them, dropping phrases about media partners and brand visibility. She was marking her territory, showing me that up here, in this world of high stakes and high altitude, she was the one with the power. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, waiting for the performance to end. When the appetizers arrived, I reached into my purse. I did not pull out a reading glass or a tissue. I pulled out a thick manila envelope and placed it gently in the center of the table, right between the truffle fries and the tuna tartare. The sound of the paper hitting the tablecloth was soft, yet it seemed to stop the conversation dead. "Open it," I said, my voice steady. Daniel hesitated, his hand hovering over the clasp. When he finally slid the papers out, the color drained from his face. The top sheet was a screenshot of his iPad screen, showing the folder labeled blocked and muted with my email address inside. Beneath that were the printed copies of the emails Mark had written to him, the ones he had never read. And at the bottom was a full-color printout of the Lighting Up Memories campaign page from Olivia's company website, with her name listed as the creator. Olivia stiffened. Her perfect posture became rigid, She stared at the logo of her own agency as if it were a hostile witness. "I know everything," I said, speaking with the calm precision of a teacher correcting a particularly disappointing essay. "I know my emails have been diverted to a trash heap for 3 years. I know that the story of the Woodhouse and the struggling widow has been twisted and sold to investors." I looked directly at Daniel. "And I heard your joke at the party." I repeated his words back to him. "I blocked my mum's email. It saves me from explaining things." Daniel tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry choke. He started to stammer, his hands waving in the air as if trying to erase the evidence on the table. "Mum, it was just a temporary filter. I did it because you sent too many forwards and I was under immense stress with the startup. The investors needed me to be 100% focused. I couldn't handle the distraction of daily notifications." Olivia did not apologize. Instead, she went on the offensive. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Eleanor, you are misunderstanding the industry," she said sharply. "Using the family story was a way of honoring Mark's legacy. Without that narrative, Silver River Tech would never have secured the capital it needed to launch." I looked at the two of them. They were so young, so successful, and so morally hollow. I realized they were not sorry for what they had done. They were only sorry they had been caught. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The restaurant was buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses, but our table was an island of silence. "If you need a dead mother to make your storytelling easier, you can continue on your current path," I said, delivering the only verdict that mattered. "But the mother standing right here is done being silent." I did not wait for the check. I turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving them sitting alone with the truth spread out across the white tablecloth. The next day, I went back to see Victor. This time, I did not bring my laptop for a lesson on passwords. I brought my resolve. "I don't want to destroy my son or his company," I told him. "But I need Daniel to understand that respecting his mother is not optional." Victor nodded, a look of grim approval on his face. He told me he knew exactly who we needed to call. He introduced me to Lucia Morales, a sharp, young attorney who specialized in privacy rights and media exploitation. She operated out of a small, sunlit office downtown that smelled of old paper and strong coffee. Lucia reviewed my file with the intensity of a hawk. She flipped through the screenshots of the campaign and the printed emails. Then she stopped at a specific document, the investor pitch deck for Silver River Tech. She pointed a manicured finger at a slide titled "Family Values in the Digital Age." The text claimed that every employee, starting from the CEO, treated communication with the utmost care, citing Daniel's relationship with his mother as the company's moral compass. "This is our leverage," Lucia explained. They told investors that Daniel reads every email from his mother to illustrate his character. In reality, he blocked you. In the legal world, that is called material misrepresentation. It is a lie told to secure money. We sat around Lucia's desk and drafted a formal cease and desist letter. It was not a lawsuit. Not yet. It was a warning shot. We demanded 3 things. First, Silver River Tech and Brightline Image Group had to immediately stop using the names and likenesses of Mark and Eleanor Hayes in any marketing materials. Second, they had to issue a private correction to their board regarding the origins of their brand story. Third, and most importantly to me, they had to establish a fund called Digital Dignity, dedicated to educating and supporting seniors who were being digitally isolated or exploited by their own families. Lucia warned me that this could get ugly. If Daniel and Olivia decide to fight back, they might try to paint you as a confused, vindictive old woman. They might dig into your past. I don't care, I told her. I have spent 12 years protecting their image by staying silent in the corner. I am done holding my tongue to save their face. Victor then suggested a second move, one that was quieter but sharper. He knew a journalist who wrote for a major national magazine about the widening tech gap between generations. As it turned out, this journalist was a former student of mine from Ridgeline Learning Center, a bright girl named Sarah, who had once written a brilliant essay on King Lear. Victor suggested we give her the story not to shame Daniel, but to highlight the broader issue. I hesitated. I did not want to air our dirty laundry in public. But then I thought of Mark's unread letters. I thought of his plea for connection. If my story could stop one other son from muting his mother, it was worth the embarrassment. I gave Victor the green light to make the call. The letter went out on a Tuesday morning. It was signed by me, Eleanor Hayes. But the distribution list was the real weapon. Lucia had carbon copied the legal counsel for Silver River's 3 biggest venture capital investors. It ensured that the letter could not be buried in a drawer. It had to be read, logged, and addressed. I imagined the moment Daniel saw it. I pictured him sitting in his ergonomic chair in his glass-walled office, sipping his artisanal coffee. I imagined the notification pinging on his screen. He would open it, expecting another contract or a supplier update. Instead, he would see my name in the subject line, right next to the words privacy violation and cease and desist. I knew the panic that would rise in his chest. It would be a cold, suffocating mix of fear and the guilt he had been repressing for 3 years. He could block my emails, but he could not block a legal subpoena. The walls he had built were about to come down, piece by piece. It had been exactly 1 month since our dinner at the rooftop restaurant. Silver River Tech decided to counter the brewing legal storm with a public relations spectacle they called the Family and Investor Appreciation Night. To prove they were the humane, ethical startup they claimed to be. The event was being live-streamed to thousands of viewers on social media. Because of the legal pressure from the letter Lucia had sent, they had no choice but to invite me. I was listed on the program as the guest of honor, a title that felt less like a compliment and more like a hostage negotiation. Olivia was serving as the master of ceremonies. I watched her from the entrance as she scanned the guest list on her tablet. Her jaw was set tight. She knew that if I said a single word off the carefully approved script, the company's stock value would plummet before the appetizers were cleared. She looked terrified, and for the first time, I did not feel the urge to comfort her. I entered the ballroom wearing a simple black dress that cost less than the flower arrangements on the tables. On my arm was Victor. His presence changed the atmosphere in the room instantly. Victor was a legend in the tech legal world, a man known for taking down giants, and seeing him escorting the mother of a mid-level startup CEO caused a ripple of whispers among the investors. They were not looking at my shoes this time. They were looking at my ally. They had seated me right next to the stage, in the direct line of sight of the board of directors. It was a stark difference from the table by the kitchen door where I had sat a month ago. Tonight, every time a camera panned across the room to capture the audience reaction, my face was there. I sat with my back straight, offering a polite, unreadable expression to the lens. The program began with the usual self-congratulatory videos. Then, Daniel took the stage. He looked tired, his makeup barely concealing the dark circles under his eyes. He began a speech about the importance of communication. He told a story about how, in the early days of the company, he would read my emails late at night to find the strength to keep going. He claimed my words were his anchor. Victor squeezed my hand gently under the table. We both knew this was the exact lie we had warned them not to tell. Daniel was walking into a trap of his own making. Suddenly, a hand went up in the front row. It was one of the major investors, a man who had received a carbon copy of our cease and desist letter. He did not wait for the Q&A session. He stood up and interrupted Daniel mid-sentence. "Daniel," the man said, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "If your mother's emails were so vital to your success, how do you explain the allegations that you have had her address blocked for the last 3 years?" The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the server fans in the back. Daniel froze under the hot stage lights. He looked at the teleprompter, but there were no words there to save him. He looked at Olivia, but she had turned pale. In his panic, his brain reverted to the only defense mechanism he had used before. He tried to laugh. He tried to make it a joke, just like he had done at the private party. "Well," Daniel stammered, forcing a wide, brittle smile. "You know how it is. I blocked my mum's email just to reduce the notifications. It was a productivity hack." He said it. He said the words. But this time, there was no polite laughter. This time, the room was filled with people who understood the value of data and the weight of privacy. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Dozens of smartphones were raised in the air, recording the CEO of a family values company admitting he had silenced his own mother. Olivia looked at him with pure horror. She knew that the live stream had just beamed that confession to the world. The narrative was shattered. The master of ceremonies, clearly receiving a frantic instruction in her earpiece to regain control, rushed to the microphone. She tried to pivot. She announced that they would now love to hear a few words from the woman who started it all. She invited me to the stage. I stood up slowly. I smoothed my dress. I did not look at Daniel, who was shrinking away from the podium. I felt Victor nod at me. As I walked up the stairs to the stage, I felt like I was finally stepping out of the digital void. I was walking out of the spam folder and into the spotlight, and I was bringing the truth with me. I stood before the microphone, grasping the metal stand with hands that were surprisingly steady. I did not look at the cameras that were broadcasting my face to thousands of strangers. I did not look at the investors who held my son's financial future in their portfolios. I looked only at Daniel. He was standing a few feet away, his dark suit catching the harsh glare of the stage lights, looking like a man who had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. "I learned to use email when I was 55, I said into the silence. I sat up with a dictionary and a user manual, terrified I would break the machine if I pressed the wrong key. I sent hundreds of messages, mundane poetry of a lonely life. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I waited for a response that never came. For 3 long years, I convinced myself that I was simply not smart enough for this new world. I blamed my own clumsy fingers for the silence, never suspecting that the silence was a wall built on purpose. I turned my head slightly to address the darkened room. "Is there anyone in this room?" I asked. "Who has ever sent a message to someone they loved and then watched the sent button like it was a prayer, hoping it would be received?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, hands began to rise. First one, then a dozen, then nearly half the room. It was a sea of people who knew exactly what it felt like to be on the waiting end of a connection. I turned back to Daniel. I didn't find out about the block because of a hacker or a leak. I found out because I saw my name in a folder marked muted on your iPad. And right next to my name was a folder containing letters from your dead father. Letters that had been filtered out of existence before they could ever touch your heart. I took a step closer to him. I am not standing here to bankrupt your company. I am here to remind you, and every other CEO who puts the word family on a PowerPoint slide, that if you lie about how you treat your own blood, then all your revenue projections are meaningless. Daniel looked at me. The corporate mask, the confident smile, the startup bravado. It all fell away. He dropped the microphone he was holding. It hit the floor with a dull thud. He stepped down from the little riser he was standing on and, right there in front of the board of directors and the live stream, he fell to his knees. It was not a calculated move. It was the collapse of a man who could no longer carry the weight of his own pretense. His hands were shaking violently. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. "I am sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I blocked it because seeing your name made me feel guilty for not calling. It was easier to mute you than to face the fact that I was drifting away. I let the tech world tell me my value was in my stock price, not in the woman who raised me. I looked down at my son. I did not offer him a hand up. Not yet. I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out a thin, white envelope. Inside were the printed copies of the emails Mark had sent him in the weeks before he died. I held the envelope out to him. "You didn't just block me," I said softly. "You blocked your father. If you want to start making amends, you need to stand up, take this envelope, and read every single line. Only then can we talk about forgiveness." Daniel reached out with a trembling hand and took the paper, clutching it to his chest as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling apart completely. The fallout from the live stream was immediate and brutal. Although Silver River Tech was not yet a public company, its valuation on the negotiating table plummeted overnight. The board of directors was furious, not because of the moral failure, but because the brand damage was threatening their investment. They gave Daniel a strict ultimatum. He had to present a comprehensive plan to fix the public relations disaster immediately, or he would be replaced as CEO of his own company. Lucia handled the negotiations with the sharpness of a surgeon. I told her I had no interest in a long, drawn-out civil lawsuit that would drain my energy and my son's bank account. Instead, we offered a settlement. I agreed to drop all potential legal action regarding the invasion of privacy and the misuse of Mark's likeness, provided they met a specific set of non-negotiable conditions. They had to issue a public apology, immediately cease the Lighting Up Memories campaign, establish and fund the Digital Dignity Project to support seniors facing digital isolation, and mandate workshops on digital elder abuse for every single employee. The signing ceremony took place in a glass-walled conference room downtown, with a select group of journalists as witnesses. It was a far cry from the glitzy hotel ballroom. Olivia stood at the front of the room. She was not wearing a gala gown, and there was no microphone to amplify her voice. She looked like a tired young woman with red-rimmed eyes. She read her official apology from a sheet of paper, her voice shaking as she admitted to exploiting private family memories for commercial gain. It was stripped of all the PR buzzwords she usually hid behind. Then it was Daniel's turn. He sat at the mahogany table, the settlement documents spread out before him. He had the envelope I gave him on stage sitting next to his pen. He had finally read the emails, He looked at the final clause of the agreement, which quoted a line from Mark's last letter to him. It read, simply, "If you become important to strangers, do not let that make you forget the people to whom you are the world." Daniel stared at that sentence for a long time before he signed his name. I did not hug him when the cameras clicked. I stood by his chair and spoke quietly, for his ears only. "This contract does not buy my forgiveness," I told him, "but it buys you a chance to become the man your father believed you could be." As part of the agreement, Silver River converted a large section of their ground floor into a community space named The Mark and Eleanor Hayes Corner. It became a hub for free classes teaching seniors how to navigate email, spot online scams, and protect their data. I taught the opening session alongside Victor and Lucia. It was during that first class that I saw him. Sitting in the middle row, squeezed between a retired nurse and a grandfather learning to use a tablet, was Daniel. He was not there as the CEO or a donor. He had registered as a student. He sat quietly, taking notes as I explained the basics of digital communication. At the end of the lesson, the assignment was to write a sincere email to a family member. I watched my son type, delete, and type again, learning for the first time that a real connection requires more than just hitting send. Time passed, and the wounds began to scab over. I eventually agreed to meet Olivia for coffee at a small, neutral shop. I did not go there to be her best friend, or to pretend the past 3 years had not happened. I went to set boundaries. I told her that if she wanted to remain a part of this family, she had to learn that people were not content strategies. She had to respect not just me, but everyone she viewed as a potential demographic. She nodded, sipping her tea, looking less like a shark and more like a human being who was just beginning to understand the cost of ambition. Now, I am standing in the hallway of my woodhouse. My suitcase is packed by the door. For the first time in years, I am leaving town. Not to run away, but to fly to the East Coast. I have been invited to speak at a national conference on digital rights for the elderly. Before I grab my coat, I open my laptop on the kitchen counter. I type a quick email to Daniel from my new address. "Son," I wrote, "I am leaving now. But if you want to talk, my inbox is always open. This time, I am not blocking anyone, but I will never let anyone mute me again." I hit send, close the lid, and walk out the door into the morning sun. I was once the woman pushed out of the inbox of my own family, but today, I am the author of my own story. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I would love to hear where you guys are tuning in from. So please drop a comment down below, and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this video get shared with even more people.